The sound was sharp, abrupt, and completely invasive. An echoing crack of wood against denim resonated through the otherwise quiet, insulated hallway. It sounded less like a domestic incident and more like a single gunshot in a library, a violation of the stillness. Emma's knees registered the impact first. They buckled slightly beneath her, an involuntary response to the deep, percussive shock wave. But she did not cry out. She maintained her grip on the cool, unforgiving surface of the doorframe. Her knuckles were stark white, widening beneath the simple black cotton sleeves of her t-shirt. A physical manifestation of her effort to remain upright, her clothing offered almost no defense. The wide-legged jeans, chosen for their casual comfort, were merely a thin, negligible barrier. The polished oak paddle, a symbol of forgotten childhood consequences, connected with devastating finality. The sting did not merely touch the surface. It bloomed, hot and deep, an expanding crimson stain of sensation on her backside. She bit down hard on her bottom lip. The immediate metallic taste of copper flooded her mouth, a necessary distraction. Tears, huge and hot, threatened to spill over her lower lids. Held back only by sheer force of will. The tears were not solely from the physical pain. They were born from a complex cocktail of shame, from the raw, sickening sense of disbelief, and from the surreal, unbelievable collision of her $20-year-old identity with the utter vulnerability of a $12-year-old. She was standing in the hall, exposed, accountable, and completely undone. You knew what that guitar meant. Her mother's voice was low, contained, but delivered with an unshakable, profound, unwavering quality. You absolutely knew. Emma could not answer. Her throat had seized completely, tight and useless. Her chest ached with a deep, crushing guilt that had been quietly building, molecule by painful molecule, since yesterday afternoon. This was not a minor punishment for a small transgression. This was a reckoning.S. The catalyst occurred just $24 earlier. The late afternoon sun streamed with golden intensity through the wide bay window of the living room. The light caught and illuminated millions of tiny dust motes dancing in the air, transforming the ordinary space into a shimmering, ethereal stage. Emma sat cross-legged on the thick plush rug. She was scrolling through her phone, desperately attempting to calm the chaotic, violent storm churning inside her chest. She had just slammed down the phone after a brutal, full-volume screaming match with her long-term boyfriend, Liam. He had accused her of being perpetually emotionally distant. She had retaliated by calling him suffocatingly controlling. The fight had ended with the sickening slam of the phone handset and a heart that was now pounding violently against her ribs. A frantic, desperate rhythm, like a trapped bird. She stood abruptly, her agitation demanding physical release. She began to pace the length of the room. Her black t-shirt clung damply to her shoulders, the fabric taut against her skin. Her wide-legged jeans swished with a restless, frustrated energy with every agitated step. As she paced past the large, ornate fireplace, her movement abruptly ceased. There, suspended in a sealed, climate-controlled glass case like a priceless museum artifact, hung her father's legendary vintage Gibson acoustic guitar. The wood was a rich, dark walnut. The frets were visibly worn smooth from decades of use. A single, delicate hairline crack was visible on the body, a scar that had been painstakingly, lovingly repaired with a specialized amber-colored resin. Dad hadn't touched the instrument in years, not since the creeping tremor in his hands made complex chord work impossible. But he had never, under any circumstances, allowed it to leave his possession. That guitar, he had told her once, his voice heavy with memory, saw me through my darkest nights. It is not just wood and wire, Em. It is pure memory. Emma did not consciously intend to touch it. Her mind was still completely saturated with the acidic memory of the argument with Liam, but as she executed a sharp, Frustrated pivot, her elbow, a jutting point of careless energy, caught the hard, unforgiving edge of the display stand. Time immediately slowed. The heavy glass case tilted, impossibly slow, impossibly quiet. Then a sudden, blinding sound, the shattering of the glass. The guitar tumbled. An object now completely divorced from its protective casing and hit the dark, resonant hardwood floor with a sickening final crack. It was not the gentle, musical crack of a familiar sound. It was the absolute catastrophic sound of something irreparably broken beyond repair. The neck snapped cleanly near the headstock. The delicate body fractured, a jagged line of splintering walnut running down its center dot. She froze mid-motion. Her breath caught, completely stuck in her throat. She dropped to her knees, her hands hovering uselessly just inches above the devastating wreckage. Tears welled up instantly, stinging her eyes with intense heat. The grief was not for the simple object. It was for what it had so completely and tragically represented. It was for the look that would soon appear on her father's gentle face when he saw it. It was for the crushing, impenetrable silence that would inevitably follow. Asterisk in a sudden, desperate panic, Emma acted on pure animal instinct. Hide the evidence. She frantically swept the splinters of wood and wire into a large canvas tote bag. She then shoved the heavy, incriminating bag deep under the dark sanctuary of her bed. She grabbed a brush and dustpan and meticulously swept up every last shard of glass. She aggressively sprayed an entire cloud of synthetic lavender air freshener to mask the faint metallic scent of broken things. She then attempted, with every fiber of her being, to appear completely and utterly normal when her mother came home from her shift. But Mom always noticed, always thought the confrontation came at dinner. The entire meal was marked by a heavy, profound quiet. Too quiet. Emma sat at the table, her appetite completely gone, obsessively pushing her roasted vegetables around her plate, meticulously avoiding her mother's knowing gaze. Her father sat lost in his usual quiet thought, entirely oblivious. Ironically, he was humming a very old, very familiar tune under his breath, a melody he used to play repeatedly on that very same, now shattered guitar. Then, halfway through the small ritual of dessert, her mother stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound was a definitive period on the silence. Emma, come with me. Asterisk in Emma's room, her mother pulled the heavy, sagging tote bag from its hiding spot under the bed. The weight of the broken guitar was palpable, an undeniable witness. Explain this, her mother stated. Her voice was terrifyingly, dangerously calm. Anger, profound embarrassment, and absolute fear tangled themselves into a paralyzing knot in Emma's throat. It was an accident, she stammered, the word tasting flimsy and cheap. I didn't mean to. An accident. Her mother's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with the cold, hard brilliance of undeniable truth. You hit it. The accusation was simple, powerful, and utterly annihilating. You lied by silence. That guitar was not just your father's property. It was his history. It was his identity. Her mother's voice tightened with grief. And you treated that history like disposable trash. Emma tried to reclaim her adult authority, a desperate last-ditch effort. I'm $20, Mom. You can't ground me. You can't take away my phone. What are you going to do? Spank me? Emma snapped the question out, half a defiant joke, half a terrified challenge. Her mother did not flinch. She walked directly to the linen closet. She reached inside and pulled out the smooth, worn wooden paddle, an object Emma had not seen, had not even thought about since middle school, when it had last been used after she'd snuck out to a party in the pouring rain. Age does not, under any circumstances, erase responsibility, her mother said quietly, the paddle held loosely but firmly in her hand. You broke something sacred, and you need to feel the undeniable physical weight of that failure to respect. Asterisk Emma scoffed, a brittle, disbelieving sound. You cannot be serious. Absolutely no one does that anymore. It's archaic. Maybe not, her mother replied, her gaze unyielding. But in this house, actions still carry consequences that must be felt. You will remember this lesson. Emma wanted to scream an argument, to storm out the front door, to call the act unfair and abusive, but then she finally truly saw it. The expression in her mother's eyes was not the anger she expected. It was pure, distilled grief. Grief for the shattered guitar. Grief for the trust that had been recklessly broken. Grief for the daughter who still believed that basic, fundamental rules no longer applied simply because she had reached the age of $20, and something inside Emma suddenly cracked. Not with the catastrophic, splintering sound of the guitar, but with the quiet, internal sound of ice thawing. The bitter layer of defensive defiance began to melt away, the paddling now standing braced in the hallway. Emma understood its brutal, profound purpose. This was not about control. It was entirely about connection. It was about ensuring that the hard, necessary lesson of accountability bypassed the verbal defenses and went deeper than just words. Black. The second strike landed lower, sharper, an aggressive emphasis on the first. Emma gasped, the tears finally, completely spilling over the barrier of her will. Thwack, the third. She squeezed her eyes shut, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. Her mother stopped and gently set the paddle down on the floor. Look at me, Emma. Emma turned her head, her cheeks wet, her eyes red and swollen. I don't do this because I enjoy it, her mother said, her voice thick with fatigue and emotion. I do it because love sometimes means holding you fully accountable, even when you're grown. Especially then, because the stakes are so much higher. Emma nodded quickly, unable to force any words out of her constricted throat. Asterisk the next morning. The air in the house was heavy, silent, but somehow less tense. Emma found her father in the cool, oil-scented environment of the garage. He was seated at his workbench, staring at the broken Gibson. The pieces were meticulously laid out, a tragic, fragmented map of history. Emma quietly sat down beside him on a low stool. She sat in silence for a very long time, simply witnessing his quiet grief. Can it be fixed? She finally whispered, the words small and tentative. He ran one of his slightly shaky hands over the cracked body. Not like it was, he replied, his voice soft. But perhaps something new can emerge from the pieces. Together, they spent the entirety of the day in a shared, quiet communion of labor. They meticulously applied glue, used tight clamps, and began the delicate, meditative process of sanding the ravaged wood. The guitar would never play the same familiar, deep tune again. But it would, they both knew, hang again. It would be repaired, deeply scarred, but completely whole in its own unique, new way. Asterisk that evening, as the day's final heat receded, Emma and her mother sat together on the wide wooden porch swing. They were sipping hot tea. No apologies were explicitly spoken between them. None were actually necessary. The air that now settled between them was noticeably softer, cleansed by the honest, difficult process of consequence and emotional release. Emma thought deeply about the paddle. The sudden, shocking sting, the bitter, cleansing rush of tears. She knew implicitly that modern parenting experts widely and vehemently discourage all forms of physical discipline, citing the significant, well-documented risks of anxiety, depression, and emotional instability in young adults who experience it. She knew the studies showed that corporal punishment reliably correlates with poor psychological adjustment, often extending into early adulthood. Many experts argue that this form of discipline only teaches profound fear, never genuine understanding, but in the quiet, absolute certainty of her heart. Emma knew her mother's ultimate intent was not cruelty. It was a covenant, a painful, perhaps deeply outdated, and arguably even misguided covenant, but one that was fundamentally rooted in profound love, in legacy, and in the desperate, fundamental hope that her daughter would carry a non-negotiable level of deep respect into her full, self-directed adulthood. As the first fireflies began to blink their small, cool lights in the deepening dusk, Emma leaned her head quietly onto her mother's strong shoulder. "I'm sorry," she finally murmured into the soft fabric of her mother's shirt. Her mother simply kissed the top of her head, a soft final benediction. "I know." And in that moment of absolute quiet connection, that was completely and profoundly enough.